back. Okay, so probably you can hear me. Okay, I have turned off the themes, but there's info that you can all hear me. I'm gonna just confirm. Or maybe via YouTube. I'm gonna check if I'm live, and that works. Okay. Can you write in the chat that you can hear me and everything is okay? Just to confirm. That would be great. Just a moment, so everybody will come, hopefully, and we can start with the presentation actually. Okay, great. So we can start. Thanks for the confirmation, guys, and thanks you're here. We can turn that off. Great. So let's start. Sky's the limit. So today we're gonna talk about clouds. So the sky will not be a limit this time. Just a few words about me. Who am I and why I'm talking to you? Okay, so first of all, I'm a retiring Microsoft Student Partner. So I have been like for 3.5 years a student partner. So I'm slowly retiring. I'm also a head of cloud solutions and co-founder of Huge Services. Node.js and not the developer. I'm a student as well because I'm a student partner. I study on Poznań University of Technology in Poland. I used to dance breakdance for like about 10 years, and I'm trying to become a blogger as well. Yeah, so Microsoft Azure. That's our topic as well, because that's the backend for our APIs in here. And my thoughts on Azure is how to interpret that like generally. So I treat Azure as Legos, let's say like that, as puzzles, because each service you get in Microsoft Azure is like a separate piece to our whole solution. So today we are going to talk about one of that pieces of Azure. And now coming to REST API, I hope that everybody knows what is a REST API, but developing REST API is coming with some problems actually, or maybe challenges, that would be a better word. First, it's versioning, documentation maintenance, user management, subscriptions, and insights. By subscriptions, I mean, let's consider you're developing a SaaS solution and you want to have your users using that, but like to make an integration with your system, then you want to have some kind of user management for them, some kind of subscriptions for them, versioning of that API, etc., etc. So that's like you have the whole, generally the big system, like a big system, and you want to have external company to use that as well, but programmatically. And there is a solution to all that issues or challenges, as I said, and this is the API management service. So basically, you can treat that as some kind of facade proxy adapter, and this is like this actually. You got a user who is using the API application, I don't know, some kind of REST API, maybe Logic App, maybe Azure Function, put everything in here. And you've got your database, of course, just for the sake of this example. So the user is interacting directly with the app. And here comes the API management, and that is helping a lot with the management of this user. So it can help you, for example, to have the limit of requests per minute for the particular user, for example, or to make some cache, or to, for example, you can first create the API management, make some mockups, and then add the API when it's needed underneath. Okay, so first, we are going through the short demo of how to create that service, and then we're gonna go through another example. So, first things first, I suppose you're already familiar with Azure portal. You can go to API management demo in my case, or create a resource group. That's something I consider you already familiar to as well. So if you have created the resource group, of course you can do that as well from the CLI or from the REST API, but we're going to use, for the sake of this tutorial, only the Azure portal. And in here, after you've created the resource group, you can go to the step of creation the new resource, and you can just search for API management. You hit create, and not much has to be done in here. You just select the proper resource group, the name, which is unique globally for the whole Azure, that's unique, organization name, and you get pricing tiers. Pricing tiers is something we're gonna cover in a couple of slides later, so that we can skip that for now. Then you hit create, and that's all the job you get to do. And after you have done everything correctly, you will have it deployed in the portal. That takes some time, of course, depending on the region, etc., but basically it's about like 20 minutes, something like that. That took 20 minutes in my case, like a couple of times, so I consider that's the case. Yeah, so in here you can see the API management. So that's pretty basic how to create that. Then after that steps, you can see there are two, in the overview tab, you can see we've got like two portals, and it's something interesting for us. First one we're gonna cover is the developer portal. The developer portal is the portal which is for your end users. I mean, this external company we've mentioned earlier is actually the user of your API, and in here they can see your API, your methods which you have. There's like example aka.ms, and you can just, and this user can just go and check the documentation of your API, and it's provided by API management itself. It can be, of course, customized as well. So we can, for example, change the logo, change all the messages in here that you can see, etc., etc. So it's kind of customized, so you can actually make it like your own experience with the whole API documentation in here. How to get an access as a developer to that? So the developer has to sign up. Then he receives an email, of course. He's accepting that, and then he's inside your API. As you can see, this user actually, which is me, has no subscriptions, no applications, but he can do that as well. And then you have to accept that user in the Azure portal. So then this person can actually use your API, and you see how many requests, for example, he's done, etc., etc. Of course, there's a second way. You can invite somebody. There's one small detail I want to put our focus on as well. That's the ID. If it comes to ID, there's one small issue. Before there was an update lastly, but so you can set up your own ID in here when you're creating the user. But before that was, I can show you that actually, because that's not so much effort. If I'm gonna go to users in here, click to invite somebody. Let's say he's got this name and this last name, and let's go with some test email at microsoft.com. Then every special character is changed with this character, and basically we could assume that it's going to work like that, but if somebody is registering from the developer portal, then his ID is totally random GUID. So basically, do not consider it's like a pattern. So if you are developing the external solution which relies on that, don't do that. Just check the ID via API, REST API. Okay, publisher portal, and that was just a side note, but very important. Side note, like developer, publisher portal. If it comes to publisher portal, we can customize things like navigation in here, of course. We've got also some analytics in here, the content of our documentation, etc., etc. So this is why this is important to us. But as you can see, the message on the top that should be retired or depreciated at 1st May of 2018, they didn't do that yet. So couple of things are right now available as well in the Azure portal itself, and they are doing the team is doing the changes to move everything to the Azure portal actually, but we don't know when. Okay, so first thing we can do with our API management is mocking the API. So for example, you can create the new API, which will be listed for the developer, for the end developer, and he can actually test that and have some like mocked responses. How do we do that? How do we add an API? So first, we are going to our tab of APIs in the API Management Service tab, Blade in like Azure Portals nomenclature. And here you can see we can add a new blank API, for example, with the product, which you can treat as subscription actually. So, which you can treat as a bundle of subscriptions and APIs which are for somebody. So somebody can have like unlimited subscription for some API or limited subscription for other API, and that's the whole bundle. So the product for the end customer. So how do we do the mock response? So we are adding the new operation in our newly created API. Then we are going with, okay, maybe let's go just a bit back. So basically our one operation consists of the front-end inbound processing, backend, and outbound processing. What does it mean? It means front-end is pretty obvious. That's the endpoint we are making the request to. Then there's inbound processing. Inbound processing is we want to do something with what we've got from the front end. So it's just some kind of policies or other things we can do with the data we've received. Then we are sending that to backend, of course, so to our another application. And then we are receiving that. We can do with the received data from the backends as well some operations. And then we are returning that to the front end. So you can see that's graphically well designed in here. And in here, we are making the front end with the response, and we are mocking that we are returning 200 OK with sample field test. We're gonna go through that later. And we can also add a policy, which is a mock response. And in this inbound processing, we can just create the response we want to get. And then we can see that in the portal, of course, we can have as well a test option, which is basically invoking our API, like, for example, with Postman. Of course, testing this API is also available in the developer's portal. This is only for the design purposes. What we can do as well, we can import existing APIs, and here's the tab from the service. You can see that we can have some format of OpenAPI we can do a blank API, of course, as well, or we can just consume API app or, for example, logic app. So if we got or function app. So if we got our function app or logic app, we can easily add them to our solution, and it's available for our end customers as well. Yeah, this is the example of consuming the OpenAPI specification, and the result of it, as you can see, is having these endpoints in our portal as well. Okay, if we're gonna need revisions, what is a revision? Revision is our change in the API, which is not like game changing. Let's say like that. It's not a breaking change. It's not something that's gonna have an impact on the end customer, and we can do that as well. We can select the current revision of our API we want to. That's just as easy as you can see. Here we are just adding the revision. Then we are just making some changes to that, like extending it, etc., etc. And then we have to click it to make it current revision. So then the developer can see in the portal, in the developer's portal, the API change history. So he says what has been changed between revisions. Then, about the breaking changes, there's API versions, and we can define a new version very easily. We can just click on these three dots at the three dots, but at the API name, and then we are just adding our version or the revision, and we can create another version with the changes we wanted to have, and make it, for example, with the revision, with the version for v1. So that's our new version, which the customer can see in here as well. And then he sees the previous version and the v2, v1, depends on the case. Additionally, we got API insights in here. What do I mean by that? We can see how many requests are coming from which developer. There's also some insights on like depending on the country, etc., etc. So you can see like which subscription is the most popular for you. Each subscription, you can define your own subscriptions, of course, like maybe we can add some like middle subscription in here, which will be for the product of like middle product, something like that. So that's gonna be like limited by like you can have like only 5 requests a minute, etc., etc. In here, this analytics is gonna be also moved from the publisher portal to Azure portal, and it looks like that right now. So you can see that it's still in preview, so that's gonna be probably ready someday. Now something that is not covered so often in Microsoft presentations, actually. So the pricing part, the boom. And here we can see there's like right now there are like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tiers, and there's one new which is really great, but we're gonna focus on it in a minute. So first of all, we got the developer tier in here: basic, standard, and premium. You can see what's the difference in here. For me, the biggest issue in here is the VNet support. So you can see that only in premium is a VNet support, virtual networks. And the problem with that is it costs so much. It's €3 actually, but the basic is really something that is enough usually. Plus, there's a new consumption tier, which seems to be great, actually. And in connection with, for example, Logic Apps or Azure Functions, you're gonna pay only for the consumption and everything will gonna be serverless. So that's really great. Coming to that serverless, if somebody's not familiar with that, somebody probably has seen that already, but serverless is like a man in the middle between PaaS and SaaS solutions. In this picture, at least, that kind of gives you the picture of what is serverless. Serverless is only the code without storing the data, so it's usually stateless, but you can have some some outer data layer as well in the end, but it's usually stateless, and that's just something that's like an action, let's say, like that. Yeah, and if you're gonna see this pricing, it's displayed right now by an hour. The problem is when we're gonna display by month, then it's become more interesting, let's say like that. The premium option is not so cheap, as you can see, but basic is really, for me, it was like a relief, because really that's like you can start using that all that stuff from day zero, while developing that service on yourself would be much more pricey than this pricing in here. And more about limits, depending on the subscription, of course, so that's why you got this tiny numbers in here. But that's something that when you are designing the solution, you should be aware, of course, as well. And you can check that on Microsoft Azure docs, actually, which is on GitHub, by the way. Yeah, and last thing, if it comes to pricing tiers, there are some like features depending on the tier as well. As I said before, the most important for me, at least for my project I've used it in, was the VNet support. And in the developer you can have that, but when you want when you want to go to the production, I don't recommend developer subscription because it has no SLA. Okay, example solutions right now. So, first case we want to cover is, consider you are developing an application with multiple Azure functions or multiple Logic apps or some web app additionally on top of that, or some API app, which is a web app as well, or some cognitive services solution in this like tutorial solution, and it's supported by all these services at once. And the problem with that would be you will have different domains, different URLs of these applications. If you want to have that all in your like under one URL, then API management is a great choice for that. So it can be like your aggregator for every app you've developed. And for example, that's great also for like if you have like serverless only solutions, so only a function and a Logic app, then you don't have to have like multiple different keys to invoke that with multiple different addresses. You've got everything covered like behind API management, and that's something that's gonna help you a lot in that. The second case I want to cover with you is, of course, coming from that VNet support issue. We've been developing something for our customer, and we had the problem with we had a virtual machine in the VNet itself with some core processes which were processes you were invoking. It was operating on the database as well, etc., etc., and a PostgreSQL in there. with some database notifications, and we wanted to have it in web app. So we had like translated that to web job, which was getting that from the service bus, so we can scale the web app. But that's just a side note, because I don't know if you're aware, but web job can have like one instance, and you can have like up to, let's say, 10 instances of the web app. So only one is going to receive the message in the end. Plus, considering that, remembering that virtual machine was in the VNet, we can have the web application, which will be in the same VNet as the virtual machine. So, and on top of that, we can have API management. Here also in the web app, we have used a Swagger. So each time we have built the web app that was written in Node.js, we have produced the Swagger.json and consumed it in API management. So we didn't care about user management, subscriptions, etc., etc., but that was handled by API management. Plus, we've solved the VNet problem with the web app, which has the ability to connect to the VNet, so it can talk with virtual machine directly. Yeah, time for the demos. Okay, so first let's go with some kind of click through I'm just gonna check if that still works. Okay, there's a screen. So we're live. We're still alive. Yeah. So coming to that API management, you can go to overview and see what we've seen before. So you can see I have used my API once, not so much testing in here, but we can go with that in a minute. You can see that we can go to our analytics as well and see, for example, which user was using that API. And that wasn't me, actually. Okay, maybe maybe it's not refreshed yet. Maybe that collects it like daily or something like that. And it's in preview, remember, so that may not work yet. Anyway, let's go to our APIs. User management you've already seen. We can start with importing Open API. So basically, we've got here the conference API, Azure Websites.net. That's from the Microsoft documentation. So we can just paste this whole description of the API, or select the file and put it from our disk. We've been doing that with Swagger.json manually. We're setting the display name, the name of the API, and hit create, of course. And in a couple of seconds, we can see that the API is added for us. And we can see, for example, get session, maybe get sessions, so we will not pass anything to that. You can see that we can put some query parameters, so name, number, keyword, and that goes to conference API Azure Websites.net. This is the backend. We can set this processing to all operations. So if we're gonna, for example, change that for all operations, that's gonna be overridden everywhere. Then we can create something totally different for this one operation, etc., etc. So it's highly customizable. Every inbound process is behind the scenes the XML structured data in which we can actually define some policies. We're gonna go through that example as well. So basically, we can go to the test, or maybe even more. Let's go to the test. Let's click the get session, and let's try to invoke that API. Maybe without any parameter. Let's say if that says something. And here we got our response. We can see it, 200, okay, so that worked. We got some items and my browser, okay, works. We're gonna go right now to the overview and to developer portal. We can see that it already created the API for us in here. And there's a description as well. We can open that. And we've got something that our end customer will see. And here is, for example, a curl example, how to invoke that, some C#, JavaScript, Objective-C, Ruby. So that's kind of useful. Of course, we can also download the API definition in the format we want. So maybe we've got something that consumes it automatically. Of course, there are some products, some applications. In products, we've got like a starter, let's say, subscription for us, which will allow us to call 5 calls a minute up to maximum of 100 calls per week. These products are by default. We can customize that or define our custom as well. Yeah, okay, so we've got the API in here defined. What can we do more about that? So I have prepared a very short logic app, very short logic app, and it succeeded once even. Yeah, so it has the URL of the request. It's the post request with some parameter, with some body which has the message of type of the string, and it's telling us after receiving that request that everything went okay, because in Azure everything always works. Yeah, so we can actually import that to our API management. In here, we can add a new API, and this time we're gonna select Logic App. We can browse. It's not gonna go with the File Explorer, but with Logic Explorer, Logic App Explorer, and we got here My Logic App. We can select that, and hit create. Everything is okay for us in here. We're gonna hit create, wait a couple of seconds. Okay, that actually already exists. Let's go with this is test. And now in a couple of seconds, we should have it added to our API. Yeah, there's a new API. We can see that it's like our wrapper again. We can create basically the whole API using only logic apps, so not much of a knowledge of programming will be required to create something awesome, I think. So that's pretty nice. Yeah, so this is doing something for us because we have added that and this done something for us, which is really great. First of all, that added some processing in here for our inbound request. And what it does is, of course, OCP, APM subscription key, so we know which subscription key was passed. And the second one, which is more important, is the key of our logic app, because our logic app needs some signature to invoke that, and it's passed in the URL, so we can see two curly brackets in here and two curly brackets. That means that we are using some kind of, let's say, variable, but that's a named value, and we can find it actually in here. You can see that we've got my logic app manual invoke blah 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 blah. This is a secret, so I'm gonna show you a value so you can invoke that as well. I'm gonna delete it after the presentation. And you can see that it's already added for us. Of course, if I'm gonna refresh the developer portal, which is gonna happen in a second, we can see that we've got our logic app added to that as well. So we can have like multiple logic apps added in here, for example. That gives us the same URL to invoke all of that. We can test, of course, if what we've done here is working. Let's go with manual invoke, test. As I remember, there was a body needed, which was message anything. We can send the test in here, and we can see that's 200 okay and success true, so it works. Great. Coming back to our policies, we can also design that, and for example, maybe not like that, but we can add a policy. That's something also quite new in this API management. So we can add a limit call rate by key, and our key in here, let's say with 2 calls per 60 seconds, so 2 calls on a minute. And let's go with IP, maybe with API subscription, and that's for any request. So we've added the new rule, and that's gonna work, of course, like we expect. It's gonna limit the call rate. So if we're gonna invoke 3 times the endpoint, it's gonna block the user from doing that. I don't know if that works actually in the test. Let's check, but probably that should be something that we should actually check through Postman, so it detects our API. But let's just check for this purposes. Okay, let's go with first shot. Or we can go with Postman. So we can see that works actually. Oh, but I don't have the key, so that's gonna maybe like that. Yeah, too many requests. So it works. We've hit it 3 times. We got to wait 51 seconds. So we know how much do we have to wait to invoke it once again. Let's close the Postman. Yeah, okay, that's all if it comes to demos. The summary. So the summary is don't reinvent the wheel, because there's already a service in Azure probably which can do something for you. Of course, Azure services are designed to be helpful in specific use cases. I mean, if Microsoft has predicted that something can be used for something, that's the good annotation for you that you should go this way in Azure. Sometimes it's there's a case when you have to deal with some difficulties because somebody will have not predicted that it's gonna be used like that. So every time you're designing anything on Azure, try to read about limitations of the service. That's the first thing, and maybe the second thing would be the pricing. And yeah, so basically I encourage you to use API management as much as you can, because that's the service which helps a lot and helped me and my team working for the client, and that's sped up development a lot. And what's next? The next would be the Microsoft Azure documentation. And this is something which is open source as well. So if you find something interesting that is not in the documentation, you can contribute. My blog is also a good source. In a minute, maybe it will be a good source because I have started it like this month actually. And I'm gonna write something about Azure API management for sure. And right now, if you're interested in, if your native language is not English, then there's a neat solution how to create how to turn off auto-translate feature in Microsoft documentation, so that might be helpful for you as well. And soon I'm gonna also write the article on how to make something like that. So that's the visualization of the crimes in some city in USA with Microsoft Azure notebooks. Plus, if something commercially, I can help you with my company, which is Huge Services, of which I'm co-founder of. And that's all from me. If you have some questions, then hit me on Twitter, or hit me on email. I got the classic MSP email, or Dawid at hugeservices.pl. Yeah, so that's everything from me, and thank you for your attention. Oh, you can hit me also on Facebook or wherever. You can find me on the internet pretty easily.